Oh my god, I read so many books. This is gonna take forever. Alright, can I do this? Can I do this? Yeah. Oh goodness, I'm gonna put these down. It's heavy. Hi guys, it's Kira, and today I'm going to be discussing all 16 books that I went through. I'm not looking forward to editing this whatsoever, but let's just go ahead and get into it. It's been a little bit since I've done a wrap-up. I'm going to be getting back into doing wrap-ups again. I'm actually contemplating, because I've been reading so much lately, like whether or not I want to do bi-monthly wrap-ups, because I've been going through books like crazy lately. It's really been helping me like cope with everything that's going on in the world right now, so I feel like it's very productive for me like to maybe do mid-monthly wrap-ups depending on how much I'm reading. Let's just go ahead and get into the books that I read. So once again, I'm going to be doing this in the order that I read them. So the first book that I read in the month of May was Monstrous, written by Marjorie Liu and Sam Katada. This is a graphic novel with beautiful, beautiful artwork. It's actually a fantasy. It's very dark, and basically, like, this is about the war between humans and archaics. Archaics are these ancient beings that have been around for quite a while, and they're ancient beings, like they were pretty much here like since the dawn of time. And one of these ancient beings lives in our main character, who is this amazing like person. She has like this archaic like living inside of her, and at some points, because the archaic is very hungry for human flesh and she's trying to deny it the human flesh because she does not really vibing with the fact like that it likes to eat people, she actually has some of her arm missing, because there was moments like where she woke up and the archaic was actually in charge, and she actually ended up mauling off her own arm. I absolutely love this series. This is volume 4. They're continuing to make these still. This is one of my favorite graphic novel series of all time. If you guys look, these illustrations are just so beautiful. And that's actually one of the reasons why I really love this, but I also love this because it's a very rich and detailed world. Like, there's so much to it, and they're still doing world building on this also. So it's just gorgeous. Absolutely highly recommend this series. I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. I just love everything. I just love this series every time I read it, and I can never get enough of it. The next book I read was actually a manga. It was My Hero Academia Volume 3. I have never seen the anime before. I've still been kind of like going through like these, and I really, really enjoyed this. However, I feel like I want to see the fight scenes, so I probably am going to end up switching to the anime itself. This is still a really enjoyable series, but I feel like I've reached a point like where I'd rather watch the series over reading the manga, which is kind of a rarity for me, because usually I prefer to read over watch, and I usually read stuff more than I watch TV. But I just feel like I was lacking like maybe like the action, like the real action. Everything of course is excellently done in this, but like I feel like I just really wanted to see the action instead of reading it. So I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is The World's Last Night by C.S. Lewis. I actually did a vlog for all 3 of these. It kind of talks a little bit more about like my feelings. I'm going to leave a link for that in the description above. But this was actually a non-fiction book, and it's all about Christianity and belief systems that they had. This is actually it's not very thick at all, but it's actually a very dense text for what it is. And because it's so dense, like there was a lot of references, I'm sure personally, like that I did not catch. I don't feel like I was the right audience for this book. I did not feel like I enjoyed it as much as I should have. I have always been interested in reading about other religions, and I'm interested in reading about religions in general, and I feel like this was very well done, and I feel like it did a lot as far as like opening my eyes like to things like that I hadn't really thought about. So because of that, I did end up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really did enjoy it, but there was a lot that went over my head, and I feel like the footnotes, like there could have been more footnotes, and I kind of wish there were more footnotes so it kind of could describe things to somebody who's a novice like myself with this kind of literature. So while I enjoyed it, I kind of wish that there was more. So the next book that I read is The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. This is about Alessandra. Alessandra is very bold, very She's very sexually open about herself. This is a YA book. This actually been marketed as a Slytherin romance, and I can kind of see like why it's considered a Slytherin romance. Usually, traditionally, Slytherins are all about opportunity and raising in the ranks, like when the opportunity arises. And Alessandra, our main character, is no different. She actually plots to kill the king so that she can take over as queen and gain all of the power and riches and everything that come with royalty. But when she gets there, she gets more than she bargained for. This actually ends up being like such a fun romance. It's definitely like YA. There's no explicit sex scenes in this at all, even though it's considered a romance because it is YA, but I really just enjoy it in general. It was so funny and it was just really engaging. I actually did a reaction vlog for this as well. If you guys are interested in watching that, I will also leave that link in the description above to get more of a discussion from it. But overall, like, I really had a really good time reading this. I loved Alessandra. She was very feisty. I loved her kind of chemistry with the Shadow King, and it was just such a fun, relaxing read. It was so quick. I devoured this book like in a day. I could not put it down. It was just a lot of fun. It's definitely like not one of the most developed books in the way of the world, because like there's just, I mean, it's not a very thick book. Like, they don't, like, to get everything that they wanted to do, like they couldn't like really go into that much detail like without making it really, really huge. But I feel like the overall progression of the novel and everything was very smooth, and so I really appreciate that about it. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of May is After the Flood by Cassandra Montag. This book, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie with Kevin Costner, Waterworld. This book really reminded me of that. We have our main character Myra, who exists like in this world that's been flooded, and she's having to help her and her child survive. Pearl is 7 years old. She's never known her father. While Myra was pregnant with Pearl, Myra's husband actually abandoned her with their other daughter, Ro. He ended up practically kidnapping her and taking her on a ship because he wanted to go somewhere else rather than where they were. And she wanted to wait till at least like the baby was born, but they also had a lot of responsibilities. They had her father to worry about, and she was just really trying to be responsible, but he ended up taking off. So she has a picture of Ro, and every time they get to port, she actually shows a picture of Ro and says, "Hey, do you know this girl? Have you seen her?" She has spent 7 years trying to hunt for her other daughter, and to no avail. She has not been able to locate her. One day she gets attacked by this raider who wants to take her and her 7-year-old daughter Pearl onto their ship and kind of use them for breeding. So they, of course, are very resilient and they end up killing him, but before he dies, he tells them that he knows where Ro is, and he says that she's up north. The reason why I referenced Waterworld for this with Kevin Costner is because that movie and this book really have this very similar feel, except we have a female protagonist versus a male protagonist. And Myra, who's our female protagonist, is extremely resilient. She's had to figure out how to survive, and so she's very good at fishing, and she's able to get most of what Pearl needs just by fishing. Granted, times are still tough. There's very slim resources because most of the area is covered in water, and she's trying to figure out how to survive, just her and her daughter. But there's also raiders. Raiders I remember from Waterworld too, like they were kind of like the new form of government, and they were very chaotic, and they kind of just took things for their own even though they did not own them. And it's kind of a really crazy thing. But what I really loved about this too is like there is a little bit of a romance in this, and it wasn't overplayed, it wasn't overdone, it just really flowed very naturally, and I really appreciate that about it also. This was another book that I read very, very quickly. I really devoured this. I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5 stars. I was kind of like on the fence, like about like what I was going to rate it right after I finished it, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted to give it a 5 stars, but honestly, like, I can't imagine giving it anything less because it was really well written and it was really well done. I mean, if anything, like, it might be a 4.75 stars, but like it was so close, I just figured I'd go ahead and round up to the 5. I really enjoyed the character development with this. This is really like about a mother's journey and a mother's responsibility, and so this does have a lot of things to do with being a mother, which I really enjoyed that as well. And it was just so passionate, and it was very well written, and it was very smooth, like its progression and storyline. I really enjoyed this. If you like that movie Waterworld with Kevin Costner, you will so like this. This was a lot of fun. It was very interesting, but it's a very serious novel. It's really not fantasy, but it feels like it's something like that could actually happen. It's more of a contemporary tone, and so it's very easy to read. So I do highly recommend this also, and it was so enjoyable, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read on my Kindle, and this is actually a romance. It's called The Younger Man by Karina Halley. I was actually pleasantly surprised by this one. I heard so many things about it. I've heard a ton of very positive things about it. Pretty much everybody that I heard that has read this has absolutely positively loved it. And, you know, in the past, I've always been into the bad boys, but I was pleasantly surprised. I actually really loved the good boy in this. So this takes place over in Madrid. They have soccer over there, but it's actually called football. So the Real Madrid is a team that the main character, Halia, actually took up with. She is a physical therapist. She was working with the Manchester United, and she was married to the coach. They had this really public divorce because he was cheating on her. Pretty much it's common knowledge over in London that this happened to her, and she ends up getting hired by the Real Madrid as a physical therapist. While she is there, she meets Aleja, and he is this young soccer player, and there's actually is an age gap in this. At first I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about that, because Halia is 40 and Aleja is actually 24. I don't know if I'm probably butchering his name because I don't speak Spanish. That's not my primary language. But I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about the age gap. But when I got into it, I didn't mind it. It just felt very natural, very fluid. It felt like it felt like the right thing. It felt like the shoe fit perfectly. And I loved the chemistry and the passion, and it was just such a beautiful love story about finding, yourself. And not to mention, I don't know, I'm sure there's quite a few of you that have been in a relationship and then you guys broke up, and there's just this empty gap in your life right after you end a relationship with somebody. And I really felt like that was captured too, that emptiness, and that heartache. And because it captured it so well, by the time we got to the romance, it just felt so much more full and so much more necessary to the situation, which I really love that too. So they captured I'm not really a sports fan. I'm really not. But in spite of all of that, I was cheering for these characters. I just wanted everything to work out for them. And it's been a while since I've actually been in the middle of reading a romance that I really felt this passion about and really just had a great time with. I just devoured it and I could not put it down. I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. It was just so fabulous and so wonderful and so heartfelt. And actually, I discovered that I might like good boys who do sports. Honestly, I was kind of shocked, but it was so great. I can't even, I keep thinking about that book. I read it last month, and I've read a lot of books since, but I keep thinking about that book. So we go from one of the most enjoyable books that I read to the most hated book that I read. And I don't know if it was because I had read it just after a healthy relationship type book, and then I got into this one, and then I just was really pissed off about it because it just did not sit well with me at all. I was mad. I was really mad after reading it. And there's a sequel. I will not be picking it up. And I think, and it's not the fact that it was poorly written. What really kind of struck me about it was how toxic the entire thing was. And I know it's staged as a bad boy romance, but I was not okay with how it was set up. It's actually called Depraved by Bella J. I also read this on my Kindle. Some trigger warnings for it. You have trigger warnings for kidnapping, eating disorders, abuse, and non-consensual consent. This is an adult romance, so there are explicit sexual scenes in this. This book, I felt was just so... It was pretty toxic. You have our main character, Alex, who is the daughter of the police chief. She is actually a ballerina. She's in her 2nd year of Juilliard. And, of course, there's the cliche, of course, that ballerinas have eating disorders. So that was kind of captured in this as well. And I liked how they captured the eating disorder. What I didn't like was how they handled it. They handled it, in such a way, they were kind of, forcing her to eat and, threatening her to eat. And I didn't feel like it was a very loving atmosphere at all, which really just kind of bothered me. But what really took this a step further for me, Alex's mother really wanted her to succeed. So she actually pretty much forced her and guilted her into eating only the things that she wanted her to eat. And there was a lot of emotional abuse. Alex kind of like went through has a very unhealthy home life on top of everything that's about to happen to her in this book. And so she's been very sheltered her whole life. And then because she's the daughter of the police chief, she gets kind of caught like in some crossfire here and there. And then she meets Granite. Granite is in charge of one of the local motorcycle gangs, the Street Kings. And he's been watching her from a distance. He visits the police chief's house sometimes. I'm not like really sure like why they didn't really get into that one particularly. But he visits her father sometimes, and so he's seen her from a distance. He's been keeping an eye on her. And every time she went to have a healthy, like even like, you know, normal relationship, he kind of thwarted it and then stopped it, and then, you know, like things just kind of never worked out for her. So not only was she sheltered by her mother, she ended up being sheltered by him too. And in most cases, I would be like, okay, well maybe he's just trying to protect her. But the way the book was set up, I didn't feel like that. I felt like his entire motive, like throughout the entire thing, was pure selfishness. Like, yeah, okay, he cared about the fact that whether or not she was eating, but like, it didn't sit well with me. The main reason I'm even giving this book 2 stars is because I really felt a lot for the main character. I felt really bad for her. She dealt like with a lot of emotional abuse from her mom. You know, she gets kidnapped and she meets Granite, and Granite, like, I don't feel like was really like much better or much of a step up. And I feel like her situation with her mother as emotional abuse was almost used to justify like why it was okay for her to be in a situation like that with Granite, who like was maybe trying to protect her, but like not in a healthy way. Like the whole book just kind of, the whole relationship to me just felt extremely toxic. And like I've read bad boy romances before, but like this just took it for me like for a step further. And I didn't like it. I didn't dive with it. It just wasn't, I was not comfortable with the whole situation. So I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read in the month of May is The Lovely War by Julie Berry. This has been a book like that a lot of people have read and really, really, really loved. And I really enjoyed it too, actually. This actually takes place on 2 separate timelines. The first timeline is in 1942 when Aphrodite is caught by her husband trying to cheat with Ares. And you know, she kind of like, you know, was trying to capture like really like the human condition, and the whole story is actually narrated by a Greek goddess, Aphrodite. So you actually have like this narrated by a few different Greek gods, which was really interesting and really unique because overall this book is very contemporary. The storyline itself, like that Aphrodite is telling, is set between 1912 to 1913. The storyline that Aphrodite is telling itself is set in between 1912 to 1917 to start out with. I mean, it kind of like ranges like from like there because it goes like over a span of a few years during the wartime. And Aphrodite is like responsible for narrating the love portions of this. But then you also have Hades, who is in charge of narrating the spiritual aspects. You have Apollo, who's in charge of narrating for disease and the arts. And then you also have Ares narrating for the times like during the war type chapters. Now, when we first start this book out, you have our 2 characters, Hazel, who is a British pianist, and James, who she meets on the night of a dance. And it's a week before he's getting deployed, and they meet, and it's just kind of these sparks. But then you also later on get a second romance between Colette, who's a Danish girl, and her entire family was murdered, and Aubrey, who is a Black American who's actually ends up going overseas to fight in the war. I see like why this book was so popular. The fact that we had a contemporary setting kind of like narrated by Greek gods was very enlightening. During wartime, like, because war is so harsh and empty and cold, you have like this thing like where it kind of almost feel, I mean, like, and I've watched a few war movies like where like it just feels like there's like this absence of like spirituality and, you know, holy beings like kind of like watching out for you. So the fact that we had kind of like the Greek gods as a backdrop for this that are narrating, that are kind of popping up and kind of helping to influence like everything that's going on, really makes you feel connected to a greater power that was going on during wartime, which I really feel like gave you a little bit more of a variety as far as storytelling goes. And I really, really liked that portion of it. I thought it was very enlightening and very interesting how they used that. Because Aubrey is a Black American who went overseas, they actually talked a lot about how that was handled during wartime. And you don't really see that a lot in books, like how blacks were treated during wartime. They were put into a separate camp. They did have to watch their back too, because there was still a lot of racism during that time. And it was very powerful because it just really showed you like a little bit more of exploration about how blacks were treated during the war. And it was really heartbreaking too, because like they fought just as hard as anybody else, and they were treated so differently. So overall, I feel like this was a really, really enjoyable read. I really had a lot of fun reading it, but because it was narrated instead of having like a situation like where you had the perspective of the individual who was falling in love, I kind of feel like I experienced the love that we had in this like a little bit at a distance. And that was mainly because of the fact that we didn't have the person who was falling in love narrating the story. We had an outside narrator, so we never really got a glimpse inside of the heads of the people that were falling in love. I feel like that's like one of the reasons why I end up loving a lot of the romances that I read, is because like you get the mushy feelings and like the tunnel vision, like when it comes like to seeing like the person they love and all like the butterflies. And I felt because it was narrated instead of having the first person, you know, kind of perspective on love, I felt like I missed out on that in this book. Overall, I really, really love this book. It was a really good read. I really enjoyed it, but I also kind of wanted that first person experience of the love story. So that for me was a shortcoming. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. I still really, really loved it. I still really highly recommend it. It's just, that was like my biggest complaint. Like I just wanted that first person, and the book couldn't help it because of the way it was narrated. The things like that made this book unique were also kind of a little bit of a shortcoming, which was very conflicting as far as like the rating I ended up giving it, because at one point like I'm just like, well, this is really unique, but on the other side of this it's like, well, I really didn't feel the romance like the way I had hoped, like I do like with a lot of the other romances like that I read and have experienced and really, really enjoyed. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars for the sake that it's really unique. I really love the characters. I really love the overall story progression, but I feel like I seriously missed out like on the first person perspective of the whole falling in love experience. Hey all, Editing Kira here, and this is the end of part 1. I hope you guys will stay tuned for the next part 2, which is going to be uploaded in just a few days. If it's already uploaded, it'll be on my channel by the time you watch this. This video was just so long, like I felt like I needed to shorten it up like a little bit, and the only way I was going to do that was by putting it into 2 different parts, because I basically went through and edited out pretty much everything that I possibly could. So if you guys like this video, hit the little like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell icon if you guys want to receive emails every time I post, and look out for part 2 that will be coming up in a couple of days. Thank you guys so much for watching. It really helps me and supports me if you guys subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon and watch my content. I really appreciate you guys, and thank you so, so much for everything that you guys do for me. Hello, Editing Kira here.